What is up everybody, my name is Tyler Potts and in today's video we're going to be working on a Vue.js and Firebase chat application. Now as you can see here we have a simple login screen. Now this doesn't do proper authentication, it just does, you put in a username and you can chat. So let's go to Keith. So you can see I'm logging in this different name, so you can log in with any name you want, it doesn't actually matter, but you can see here there's been a conversation between myself and Keith. So let's say in here I say, how are you, question mark. You'll see it pops over on the right side saying how are you, but if we go over to Keith you'll see it's on the left side saying Tyler said how are you. Then we can say good, thanks, how are you, send, and you can see it's now added it here. And Keith has said it, he said good thanks, how are you, and then we can respond again. So if we go back to here you can see it's actually here. But if we go over to our Firebase chat you can see these new ones we've just entered already in here. And now if we're quick and I type in something, let's say just literally anything, and I hit send, you can see that one has been added immediately because it's highlighted green because it's literally just been added. It's super fast and it works perfectly. So without further ado guys, let's log out and get started. Okay everyone, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new Vue application. To do that you need to have the Vue CLI installed, or you can install Vue however you like to do it, but personally I prefer the Vue CLI. If you don't know how to do that, head over to the vuejs.org website and have a look there. There should be some documentation there to be able to tell you how to install Vue. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to run Vue, create, and I'm going to give it a name. So I'm just going to say Fire Chat Vue. Hit enter, and this is going to basically ask us what we want. So we're going to select some manual features here. So I'm going to select manual features. I'm going to select, not Vuex, CSS preprocessors, and that's the only one. I just want to be able to use Sass because it's a bit easier to use. So I'm just going to hit enter. I'm going to click 3.x because I want to use the composition API. And then I'm also going to use Sass with Node Sass and not Dart Sass. I'm just going to hit enter through the rest of them. But I also want it to be in the package.json file. So I'm going to hit enter on package.json. And I'm just going to hit enter through that. And now this is going to install our boilerplate application. And I'll see you once that is ready. Okay guys, as you can see it's now installed. Now we can cd into Fire Chat Vue and we need to actually install Firebase into our application. So to do that we're going to run npm I and we're going to run Firebase. Now obviously you need Node installed for this, and obviously if you installed the Vue CLI you'd already have it installed. So please go check out how you do that if you haven't already. So let's hit enter, and now this is going to install Firebase. So I'll see you again once that is done. Okay, that's installed. That was quite a quick one. So let's just clear that. And now what we can do is open this up in whatever text editor you want. I'm going to open it up in VS Code, as you can see here. I'm going to close this, and I'm just going to click back on here quickly. We're then going to run npm run serve. Now this is going to run a development server using Node.js, and obviously that's the behind the scenes, but Vue's setting this up. So we're using npm run serve here, and it's going to start a development server for us. So let's actually move this into position next to our Chrome. I'm just going to string that. I'm going to move this across. And while we're here, let's go into package.json, scroll all the way down to where you see rules in ESLint config. And there's a piece of lint. I'm just going to copy and paste this over here. As you can see, it says no used files off, because we're going to be doing a lot of getting stuff ready before we actually obviously use it. So this will stop it from erroring for us. So that's done. Let's go into source and let's delete the component or the assets, the components, going to app.vue and delete the import. Delete the components and the name, we don't need either of those, and delete the style here. We're also going to delete the import and that, and we'll just go with h1 which says hello world. So let's leave that there. Then we need to obviously give setup, which is a composition API new element, and we're just going to return nothing for now. There we go, hit save, and that should now be working. So if we go over to our app and over on FireChat, refresh this page, you can see we now just get hello world. This is exactly what we wanted. So we're going to start setting up our database. So if we go over to source, right click and click new file, I'm going to create a file called database.js. Now inside of here, I'm going to import Firebase from, and we're going to say Firebase, but we're not going to directly pull everything out of Firebase. We're only going to pull specific things, and we need to pull the app. The app is what allows us to initialize our Firebase database and connect to our database. We then need to import the Firebase real-time database, which is just Firebase database. We don't need to give it a name or give it some sort of variable name, because it will actually be hooked into here. It kind of just hooks it on top. That's not a technical term. I'm not 100% sure how that works, but that's how I believe it works. So if you do know, then let people know in the comments. Down here, let's say const config. So we're going to need a config. It's going to be an empty array, and we'll need some API keys here. Right, so we need to go grab those in a minute from Firebase. We're then going to say const database is equal to firebase.initialize app, and then we're going to pass through our config. We then want to export default and then database. Now, the reason we're exporting this as default is because we're going to import this inside of our main app component to be able to connect directly to our database. So let's go get these API keys. So over in your browser, open a new tab and search for console.firebase.google.com. Now you'll need to sign into a Google account for this, but the actual Firebase is free for testing and stuff like that. You get I think it's called the Blaze package, which is a free version. So you can see this, the old one I've done. We're going to create a new project. We've got to give it a name, so I'm just going to call this something different, maybe FireView Chat. Just muddle the words up, it always works. I'm going to click continue. I'm not going to use Google Analytics. It adds a bunch of extra stuff we don't actually need for this project, but if you do want to add it, feel free to go through with that, but I'm not going to show you how you set that up. Let's hit create project, and now this is going to create our project. It should only take a few seconds, but I'm going to skip until that's done. Okay everybody, that's now done, and as you can see, we can just hit continue. So that's going to open up our app here. So to get our API keys, we need to select one of the three options. Obviously, we're not making an iOS or an Android app here. We're creating something for the web, so let's hit web. We're then going to give it a name. I'm just going to say FireView Chat again. And I'm just going to call register app. Now this is going to start to register our application with Firebase, and it's going to create us, as you can see here, some keys. Now I'm going to highlight all these keys. I'm going to copy them, and we're going to head over to our config here, and we're going to paste them in like that. And that is all we need to do for our keys. But there's a few other things we need to set up inside of Firebase to start with. We need to actually set up our real-time database. So as you can see here, we've got our real-time database. Let's hit create database. Now we need to select United States. I tried selecting this one, which is the closest to me, and I had a lot of errors. So I'm going to stick with just the United States for now, and I'll figure out the other one at a later date. Let's click next, and because we're just doing a test, we're going to use it in test mode. We're not actually creating a productive app, but if you do want to, then obviously we can do a tutorial on how you actually secure your Firebase database in the future. So let's hit enable. So this is just going to set up. Normally it doesn't take this long. There we go. And here we go. Now we've got our empty real-time database, and now we have to do nothing else. Unlike MySQL or any of the others, you don't actually need to set up a database to actually get it working. It will just be here ready. So let's head back over to our database here. Well, actually, we don't even need this file anymore, so we can hit close. We can now come in here, under script, say import db from /db, and that's going to give us access to all of our database Firebase functions, which is great. So I'm actually going to now paste in all the styling we need for our application. The reason being is because I don't want to have to write this all out. There's a lot of CSS here, and I'm going to put this in a Git repo you can actually go and get and download. Any other circumstance, I'd normally go through the CSS, but for this one, I think it's very basic, and we don't actually need too much CSS. But if you were here for the CSS, then just have a look down it now, and you can copy this out and paste it in. Obviously, I know some of you might want to change it up and stuff, but that's all the part of learning. So take it to pieces, figure it out, and do what you want to do with it. So I'm just going to scroll down all the way to the bottom here, and we should be at the bottom now. There you go. But this also inside of a Git repo, which will be in the description of this video. So let's start with our markup now. So we've created our first part. We need to create two components here. We're not actually going to create components for this, but you get what I mean. You could create two components. We're going to create something called a view. Now, ironic because we'll be using view. And in this view, we're going to call this one login. So this is going to be our login view, but we also want to create a view which is called chat, which will be once you've logged in, the chat you can actually see. So let's just split these apart so there's a bit of a noticeable difference. And inside of login, we're going to need something called we need a form which has the login form. We don't want an action because we'll be running a submit event through this. And in here, we're going to say h1 and we're going to say login to FireChat. We're then going to give it a label, which is going to be for the username, which will say username. We're then going to have an input field of type text, which we're going to hit enter. We don't need a name or the ID, so we're just going to remove those. And in here, we're going to give it a placeholder that says, please enter your username ... Save. We're then going to go down here and say input. We're going to create one last input. Let's close this sidebar so you can see a bit better, and let's zoom in just one. So we're going to say input type submit, and the value we're going to put in is login. So that's all we need for this actual view login section. If we go back to our application over here, we have an error. DB is defined but never used. No used vars. Now, before I told you to add in to your package.json this, I forgot to mention that you will need to restart your application to get it to work. So if we now restart it by rerunning npm run surf, it should now actually work and ignore this error. So this is the error I was on about. It's actually probably a good thing it did happen. And as you can see, it's now working again. So now you can see we've got our login view. Let's just close this sidebar again. And there you go. I mean, the styling hasn't really pulled through here. I've probably named something wrong. So we've got our form, which is login form. And in here, we're missing a form inner element. There we go. So that's the styling. That should now fix it. There you go. Now it looks pretty. It wasn't looking so pretty a minute ago. There we go. So now it's all working fine. So that's great. We've got our login, but now we can't actually log in. Let's also put something in here. Let's just put h1 which says chat view. Just so when we come to check this out, if it works, it should work. So you can see here we can scroll down and we see chat view, but that's not what we want. So we need to actually come up with an if statement that says if we're logged in, only show the chat view, else show the login view. So we're going to set that up now, but first we need to sort some other things inside of our script here. So let's import a view, that's a tongue twister, a view, I'm blowing my own mind with this, a view composition stuff. First one is going to be reactive because we're going to need to be able to have a state, which I prefer using reactive. We then need the lifecycle method called onMounted. And finally, we need a reference. Now, if you don't know what any of these are, that's okay. I'll explain them when we get to them. All you need to know is reactive and ref are used to store variables which are reactive to the state of the app. So if any data changes, the template here will also update with the following information. So let's go into our setup here. So inside of setup, we're going to say const, and we're going to say input username is equal to a reference of nothing. So the reason we're using a reference instead of a reactive is because the reactive is going to hold our valuable data state, whereas the reference is just going to be a variable we need to reference or vmodel. It's normally used on input forms and stuff like that, and hence why we're using an input username here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pass through input username to our return, which is going to allow us to use it inside of our template here. So you can see where we've got this input here. We actually want to add the model to this and set it equal to input username. Now let's break this down, tab it onto different lines because I think it looks a bit neater that way for forms. So there you go. Now you can see we're using vmodel input username. That's going to bind this value, so whatever we type in this text box, to this variable, which is going to be obviously useful for when we log in. So let's create a login method now. So we're going to say login is equal to an arrow function, which is basically going to check if our input.username.value, so when we're inside of the script, this reference needs a .value. Because we're not actually, if you wish to set this equal to something, it wouldn't work. You need to actually just say .value and then set that equal to something. But in this case, we're just going to check if it's not equal to empty strings, or if input username .value is not equal to null. Now this is just basically saying we've got our input value, we're checking if it's not empty or it's not equal to null. If those two, basically if it has something inside of it, we're going to say state, which is going to be our next thing we create. So let's create a const state, and let's say it's equal to reactive. So as I said earlier, this is going to hold a couple of things. It's going to hold our username, which is our state username, not our input username. They are different. This means we're logged in. This one is just for our form. And this is going to be empty, equal to an empty string. We're also then going to say messages, and this is going to be our messages, where we hold all the messages that have been sent and which are currently stored on our local state. So in here we're going to say state.username is equal to input username.value. So this is going to set our state name to this, which is in turn going to log us in. We then want to say input username.value is equal to a empty string again, because we've logged in, and if anything goes wrong, we want to make sure it's reset back to nothing. So as you can see here, that's logging us in. We now need to pass login with our return. So let's pass it through there. So now we can use this inside of our login form here. So you see where we've got form, we're going to use something called on, which is a directive, which in Vue is basically a directive is something you can do, you can hook it on. It's like an attribute that does something. A on says you can do on click, for example, and this will give us a click event. We can also replace on with @click instead. And we can say when we click on the form, we could log in, but that's not what we want to do. We want it to check for when we submit a form. So we could say on submit, and then we could pass through here login. I'm going to replace this though with the @ symbol because it's shorthand. Something else we need to do as well is also use prevent. So just like in JavaScript, when you do e.prevent default, this is what this does here. It basically stops the page from refreshing. It stops the default action from happening on the form. Super handy. It's called a modifier, a directive modifier, and it's really useful. So we're going to log in. So this is actually going to log us in. It's going to take the information from here and attempt to log in. But we need to do something else. Obviously, this is great. This is working, but we need to actually run a check here. We need to say, we've got to use another directive called if. And this is just a conditional statement, like an if statement in JavaScript, where we can pass through a condition. So we can say username. So this is the state username. We actually need to pass our state through our return here. So anything we want to take from our data area or our setup, we need to pass it through return to be able to use it inside of our template. So you can see we've got state.username is equal to an empty string, or if it's state.username is equal to null. So if it's equal to null or if it's empty, we're going to show the login form. Else, we can go else, which will then in turn basically say this will show. So it's like an if statement, but built in Vue. Really cool in the actual HTML. So if we go back here, you can see if I scroll now, you can no longer see the chat view. Instead, you only see login to Firebase. But if we hit enter, so let's say we've got Nunk and then we hit enter, nothing happens. But if we type our name and hit enter, you can see we log into the chat view, which is perfect. That's what we wanted. So now we can log in. But let's actually get started on the actual messaging system. So inside of our chat view, we want to create a header. Inside the header, we just want a button with the class of logout, and we're going to say logout. Now we're going to have another modifier on here, but we're not going to add it in yet. It's going to be our logout function on click. We're going to say h1. We're going to say welcome, and we're actually going to say we'll use these template strings like how Handlebars works, and we're going to say state.username, and this is going to grab our username and display it on screen. So whatever your name is on here, it will show. We're then going to create a section.chatbox, which is going to be where we obviously have our messages. So I'm just going to put messages. We're then going to have a footer, which is going to have our form in, which allows us to send messages. So we'll just say form. We're going to have no action right now, but actually that's a lie. We are going to have something. We're going to do another at submit.prevent, but with nothing in it. So what this is going to do is it's just going to make sure when we click this form, it's going to do nothing. So it doesn't when we submit this form, it's not going to restart the whole or refresh the whole page, because we don't want that happening right now. So we'll create an input of type text, obviously remove the name and the ID. And we're going to pass in, obviously, we're going to do another theme model, but for now we're just going to say placeholder, write a message, ... And then underneath this, we're going to create another input. Sorry, let me scroll up. So, input type image, that's new. Input type submit, and inside there, we're going to say send. There you go. So let's go back, and as you can see where it now says welcome. We've got our log out, and our messages are down here, and obviously it's got a little comment in there that says messages. So that is now all set up. So our view and all our HTML markup is set up. We're just going to need to set up obviously a little bit more for displaying the messages later on. But let's go down here and let's actually start submitting messages we sent. So let's go down here underneath login, and let's create a new functional method, which we're going to call send message. So let's say const send message is equal to an arrow function, which is going to take in a messages reference, which is going to be our database reference, and we're going to say db.database.reference is equal to messages. So what's happening here is this is obviously connecting to what we've imported from our database, so our Firebase instance. We're then getting the database, which is the real-time database for Firebase, and then we're getting the reference, which is going to be the name of our collection we create inside of Firebase. If we go over here, and then here you can see we have this. It will be basically nested inside this called messages, which will store all our messages in. And I'll show you how that works when we actually send a message. We're going to check if input message, which is going to be a reference. So we see we've got input username. Let's create another one called input message. And let's see it down here. We're going to say check if the value. So we're actually just going to steal this and paste it in here and replace username with message. We're then going to pass this down here too. And we're just going to check if it's equal to null. If it is, then we're just going to return. Sorry, here I've checked if it isn't equal. We need to check if it is equal, because if it is, we want to return. We're then going to get the actual message we want to send, which is going to be our username. This is what we're going to store in the actual database. So we're going to say we're going to get our current username, whoever's logged in, and we're actually going to get the content, which is going to be the input message .value. Now under here, we just want to say messages ref .push, and this is how we push it to the live database. And we're just going to pass through message. We're then going to set the input message .value back to nothing, so it clears the form for us. And that is all we need. We just need to pass through our send message in our return here. Scroll back up. And as you can see here, we've got this. So inside of our submit, we just want to say send message. So that should now send a message if everything is working correctly. So let's head back over to our app, go to here, and let's log back in. So let's say Tyler. Now let's write a message. Let's say hello. Hit enter. Nothing seems to have happened. We have no errors, and nothing has appeared there. So something else is wrong. So we've got an at submit.prevent send message, which is down here. Messages ref is equal to database.database.ref messages. So the issue is we forgot to bind this with the model with our input message, which we pass through. So like we did with the submit form or the login form, we need to do that again. So let's break this down again just so it looks a bit neater. Hit save, come back here, refresh, let's log back in. And let me just say hello. Hit enter. And it's actually sent this time inside our database. As you can see, it's called messages, which was our reference. Then we get this sort of funky ID name. It's just the key for any message we get through. They get sent a random ID. And now if we click into that, you can see it says content hello, username Tyler, which we pass through, which is perfect. So everything is working. But now we need to display the messages. So we actually need to create an on-mounted event. Let's just remove our console logs. Now below our send message, we're going to create a on-mounted event. So we're going to say on-mounted. Now to use this, you obviously have to import it from the Vue library here, which is just a lifestyle event. On-mounted gets called, I believe, every single time something changes in your component or when the component is mounted to the page. So we're going to do an arrow function inside of here, and we're just going to say, we're actually going to copy our database reference here and paste it in down here, because it's going to be the same reference. We want to get the messages from the messages array. We then want to say messages ref dot on value, and what this does, it checks if anything changes. So if anything changes, so for example a new message is added, it will update this and actually send through a snapshot back to us from the database. And in the snapshot we can actually get some data. So let's say data is equal to snapshot value. So this is going to pass back the value, which is going to be equal to all the data inside of our messages array here. So we've got that data, or we're then going to create a temporary messages array, which we're going to be using to store some temporary messages in. We're then going to say object.keys, and we're going to look through all the keys of data, and we're going to get each one, and we're going to get the key. We're going to do an arrow function, and we're just going to say messages.push, and we're going to pass through an object, which is going to have an ID, which is going to be equal to the key. The key is going to be this here, because this is the keys we're grabbing. We're looping through those keys, so we're getting these messages, which is this data, and then we're getting all the keys, which is everything inside of here, so each one of these which is submitted, and then we're going to pass it all through. We're then going to get the username, which is going to be data. We're going to get the key, and we're going to say username. We're then going to get the content, which is going to be data key dot content, and now it's going to push up to our messages, and then underneath this we can say state dot messages. So our actual state is equal to the messages we've pulled from our database, and that's going to store them here, which is going to update our DOM. So let's go. Have we passed through state? We have passed through state, of course. So let's now go back up here. So nothing's happening just yet. You can't actually see anything changing on the app. So if we go back here and go to messages, we can now start writing out how we're going to display our messages. So in here, we're just going to create a div, which can have no class. Well, it is going to have class, but we're going to set them dynamically. So a div, which has a fee4. Now there's another directive. This directive loops through an array, and it will create this element, how many times in the array there is, and we can obviously pass through the data. So we're going to say for message in state.messages, so we're pulling out each individual message and calling state.messages, where we can then get a key and set it equal to message.key. We can then get the class, and we're going to bind this. So what I'm doing here is this is called binding. So it is like fee bind, but we can just use the semicolon or the colon. And in here we're going to say this second one is going to be class. So let's break these down again, because again I think they look a bit cleaner when they're broken down. They're easier to read. So we're going to get the class, and we're just going to sell it. We're going to do an ternary operator. So inside of here we're going to say message.username is equal to the state.username. So if the message we're seeing on screen is one which we sent, we're going to pass through message as a class and also current user. Else we're just going to pass through message. So inside of here we can then write message inner, which is another div, which will then have a diff with the class of username, which we can pass through our username, which be message.username. And we can copy this, paste this, and replace username for content. Save. And that is going to do everything we need it to do. Sorry, I had an extra S there. Let's break this down just so it looks a bit neater. So we're looping through all our messages we've pulled from the database into a message, and we're going to create a diff with an inner diff with the content inside of it. So let's go back to our app, and as you can see, the one message we sent earlier is now appearing. We can't actually log out, we'll do that at the end. But for now, let's try and hit another message. Let's say, how are you? Question mark. Hit enter. You can see it says, how are you? Let's open another tab. Inside this other tab, let's do that. Let's bring it down because obviously this is designed to be mobile size. And let's call Keith. So Keith's now coming in. So we've got one which says hello to how are you. Keith's going to say, hello, Tyler. I'm good. How are you? Question mark. Hit send. And as you can see, Keith's message come through. And Keith's messages come through here too. So you can see it's come through nicely and it's looking good. Now we just need to add in the log out. I've somehow zoomed in. I'm just going to close that tab. We're going to pretend that never happened. So let's create a log out function. And now this one is the hardest function we're going to create in this whole thing. We're going to call it const log out is equal to an array, an arrow function, which is just going to say state.usename is equal to nothing. That is all the log out is going to do. Let's pass the log out through our return method so we can actually get it inside of here, and let's add a click event so we can do feet on or at, and we're going to say click is equal to log out. So let's go back, let's log in. I'm the wrong Tyler, so let's log out and log in with the real Tyler. There you go, you can see it works perfectly. So if we log out again, we come in as Lucy. You can see now none of them are highlighted, but Lucy can say, hey people. And there you go, Lucy's now logged in. We can log out, we can become Tyler for the moment. And as you can see, we can see Tyler's messages highlighted, and the same with Keith. There you go. So that is everything we're doing for today's video. I hope you've learned something substantial and you can actually use this to create your own chat app. Obviously you will need to create a better login system and a few other things, a bit more safety authentication, and maybe you could even use Google here. This isn't something we'll go cover in this video, but in a future video I'm going to be creating a lot more advanced view stuff, including authentication. So if that's something you're interested in, please let me know in the comments below and I will create it. But for now guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up, smash that subscribe button, share the video to all your friends, and I will see you in the next video guys. So thanks for watching and peace out.